an overwhelming number of questions come in, for this panel tonight. So what we've done is selected a diverse set of questions that I'll be reading out loud instead of trying to bring people on live to ask their questions. And we've tried to keep them, like I said, as diverse as possible and representative of all the great engagement that we had for this event. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our illustrious panel tonight. I have former New Jersey governor and former administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency under President George W. Bush and the chairwoman of Republicans and Independents for Biden, Christine Todd Whitman. It's great to have you with us this evening, Governor.
Pleasure, always.
I have former governor of Michigan and an R's and I's for Biden steering committee member, Governor Rick Snyder. Welcome.
Good to be with you.
Former chairman of the Republican Party of Florida, Al Cardenas. Hello, Al. Oh, you're muted there. I have former United States Treasurer under George W. Bush and an R's and I's for Biden steering committee member, Rosario Marin. Hello.
Delighted to be here. Thank you.
A former legal advisor for the National Security Council under George W. Bush and an R's and I's for Biden steering committee member, John Bellinger. Hello, John.
Nice to be here.
Former United States Congressman from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and an R's and I's for Biden steering committee member, Charlie Dent. Hello, Charlie.
Good to be with you.
And former chair of the New Hampshire Republican Party and my fellow Lincoln Project co-founder, Jennifer Horn. Jennifer, it's always great to see you.
Always great to see you, Ron. Thanks for having me.
So before we start getting into the questions, and I've got a question for each of you that I'd like you to dig into, and each of these questions has been selected for your unique background, experience, and skill set. I'd love to pass it to Governor Whitman to first set the table about the breadth of the Biden coalition and why you're putting country over party and why you think so many Americans are this year.
Well, thank you, Ron, and thank you, Jennifer, for all the work you've done in bringing this together and the work you're doing with the Lincoln Project. You know, we are a group of independents and Republicans and conservative independents who are desperately worried about the future of our country and who feel this is the time to stand up and put country above party. We're very diverse. We're over 100. We're made up of former and current office holders, congressmen, governors, local officials, appointed positions, as you've heard, cabinet members, and party officials. These are all people, we've all spent time working for our parties, whichever they are, even if you've been independent the entire time. And what we're doing is trying to show to those of you who really don't feel comfortable with President Trump, but are concerned about pulling a lever for a Democrat, because many of you have never done it before, to say it's okay, it's time. It's time to put country ahead of party. And as we watch what's going on in Washington with whether it's the COVID crisis that has led to an economic downturn and crisis, people losing their jobs, 35,000 people without jobs, unemployment numbers that are not reflective of where we want or need to be. We need to work for this, but our whole focus is to elect Joe Biden. We are not just anti-Trump, it is pro-Joe Biden. He brings the kind of decency, stability, and strength that we need in this country today. And he has a proven track record of reaching across the aisle to bring people together to problem solve in a way that makes everyone feel they have a stake in the outcome and provides the kinds of answers that will stand the test of time. And that's why, well, yes, we want to defeat the current incumbent. We really are enthusiastic about our ability to support the Biden-Harris team. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Ron, and we'll get to the questions.
Thank you so much. Yes, let's go to Governor Snyder first. I'd love for you to talk about how our viewers, we get a lot of questions, and not just for this forum, but throughout all the town halls that we've been doing, we get lots of questions from viewers about how they can talk to their friends and family who may decide to vote for Donald Trump. What would you say to a thoughtful Republican voter who says they don't like Trump, they think he's crass, but they think he'll be good for the economy?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And that's come up a lot, Ron, and I appreciate it because I've had that addressed me several times already by people I know, and my answer is simple. He's a bully to start with. Everyone knows that. But beyond that, his policies actually have not been that good. If you step back and look at it, I think it's a myth that he's a bad guy, but he's done great things. There have been some positive accomplishments, some of the trade agreements, some of the other things. But overall, if you look at it, I'll pick 2 or 3 illustrations, particularly that relate to the economy. One would be tax reform. Tax reform was not tax reform for most of us. I have an old standard. I'm an old tax professional, believe it or not. I redid Michigan's entire tax code. And the standard you want to use is simple, fair, and efficient. That's what it should be. Most people just want to say, take out a piece of paper, put your income, put a tax rate, and pay your check and go live your life. That's not what they did. They actually made a huge, complex set of rules that primarily benefited well-off people or large corporations. And all we've done is gotten a bigger deficit out of this. It really didn't help the economy. And then you look at his trade policies with the tariffs. How many jobs did that cost in manufacturing? They put tariffs literally on capital equipment, where I knew companies would have brought equipment over to our country and employed more Americans, but they essentially made it too expensive to do that. And then our poor farmers. I mean, Michigan, I love our state because we've got everything from agriculture to manufacturing, and the poor farmers took it for the team. They thought they were doing the right thing to support our country by dealing with those tariffs. They got hammered. And if you look what's come out of it, we haven't gotten sales. We've lost sales. We've lost market access. They're in a much worse position than they were before. So when you talk about Trump the person, it's easy to come up with things that are challenging. But if you actually step back and look at his policies, I think it's a flawed, it's a myth to say he had great policies. He has not. And he hasn't learned anything in his 4 years in office. That's something I learned as a governor, that without government experience, there's a long, steep learning curve. You got to dive in and go for it. He continues to just shoot off the cuff. That's not how you govern. Being negative is easy. Governing's hard. And governing in a way where you bring people together, and that's what Joe Biden has experience doing. He knows how to bring people together to solve problems, and that's what we need as a problem solver.
Yeah, really well said. Governor, before we move on to the next question, I wonder if you could share with our viewers whether or not you've had success in talking to someone just the way you have, and what the reaction is, what the response typically is, and from your personal experience.
Yeah, it's been good. And the part that's really made me happy in a lot of ways is obviously people you can get them on board after you go through your discussions and such. But one thing that really stood out to me is I've done a couple op-ed pieces, and I've done a couple other forums where I've talked to people. And the one that's really helped me a lot are the young people, the young generation, really appreciating this perspective. In many cases, they sort of got disillusioned with the political world. They sort of said, I'm not going to get involved in this big mess. But what I found is having someone speak up, particularly a Republican speaking up to say, I can support a Democrat, shows this is about being an American first. And it resonates with them because we need to engage these young people. It's their future that's coming. And they've really gotten disillusioned over the last few years. We need to re-engage them. They got to be that part of that great energy, that entrepreneurial spirit, those small business people that we need to come bring our economy back. So I think it's really been great to see the response from young people in particular.
I totally agree, and thank you for sharing that. As someone who is barely inside the window of the definition of a millennial, I appreciate that, and I resonate with it, and I think one of the saddest things to me is that it has seemed like we've lost the sense that we're all in this together over the last 4 years. And I'm personally really honored and proud of everybody on this panel today for doing what you're doing and setting the example that you're setting. So thank you for that. Rosaria, I'd like to go to you next. Could you take a minute to talk about the way Donald Trump talks about the Latino community and what impact that has on the ground and what it is doing to Latino voters this cycle?
Well, it's not just this cycle, Ron. First, let me correct you. Everybody in this panel is a millennial. Or at least we feel like one. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So 4 years ago, actually 5 years ago, when President came down and that escalator and talked about immigrants, especially Mexicans, being criminals and rapists and drug dealers. He was talking about my people. He was talking about me. I'm an immigrant. And to think that an entire campaign was based on insults to the now largest voting bloc as a minority. It's really sobering. For me, it was very sobering at that time. I became a US citizen in 1984. I was able to vote for Ronald Reagan for his reelection. And I felt welcome, not just into America, but into the Republican Party. That's when I became a Republican. I then had the enormous fortune to work for a president. He gave me this opportunity. The first immigrant woman, first Mexican-born treasurer of the United States, a Republican, was somehow saying, you belong here. We belong here. We're part of America. Contrast that with the current president. And it's just incredible for me to believe. I mean, I cannot believe that the party that I have worked so hard for would not only not raise this as an issue, almost condoning it, almost saying it's okay. And it's just painful. There is pain in my heart because I represent an expanding and growing and vibrant and wonderful community. And yet we are treated in our own country as second-class citizens, where only insults are hurled to us. So I know there are some Latinos that support the president. God bless them. As somebody who has been a delegate to 5 Republican conventions, I've been the spokesperson for 5 presidential campaigns for Republican candidates. I certainly couldn't do it this time. And I didn't do it last time when he got elected, and I'm certainly not going to do it this time. Because not only has he not earned our vote, he has lost it. And so it's just very painful, Ron. We were talking in the green room. This is not, we're not happy about it. I am not. This is painful. I worked for this party for years in the trenches, trying to bring more people into the party. But I can no longer do that. And I believe Joe Biden will be that person that will bring us together. I've said it. I don't think I will agree with everything he will say or do. But I know he will be able to somehow begin the healing process that is so badly needed right now in our country.
That's so well said. Thank you. Governor Whitman, we have a lot of questions, as you can imagine, about the coronavirus response. I think that we talked a bit about this maybe several weeks ago on our first call with you, and you mentioned at the top of the forum in your remarks. Can you explain to our viewers and to all of the Republicans out there who are listening why Joe Biden is the best person to lead the response to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Actually, that's quite easy, because he would listen to the scientists and the doctors and do what they suggested. And he would have done that right from the beginning. Now, granted, this president didn't start the coronavirus, and we didn't have all the answers in the beginning. And there were different recommendations coming from the Department of Health, coming from Dr. Fauci. But early on, they knew, and the president knew, how devastating this could be. And I always go back to the very beginning when he first came in office, and he dissolved the entity within the White House that was set up by the Obama administration to monitor this potential of a pandemic. They knew it was coming. The Bush administration knew it was coming. Sometime, somewhere, it was going to happen. It was going to start. And this administration decided not to pay any attention to it. And subsequently, they've been lying about leaving the cupboard bare and all those things. But the most important thing is there was no consistent message. Joe Biden, one thing he would absolutely do besides taking the advice of the scientists and the doctors and updating it as we learned more, which we have learned over time, and said, these are the basic things that you have to do. You have to wear a mask. You have to socially distance. You have to stay out of big groups. You have to wash your hands. Not that hard to do. And then Governor Snyder and I would say, bring it on. As governors, we can then handle that within our states as to what we have to do, what's safe to open, leave open, what isn't safe to open. But the governors never even got that. In fact, they were put in a position of fighting with one another to get the PPEs and the ventilators that they needed, because the administration didn't take it seriously, didn't use all the powers they had at their fingertips to do this. Joe Biden would have done that right from the get-go, because he understands the importance. This is what leadership is all about. Leadership is about bringing people together and giving a coherent, cohesive message in a way that people can appreciate, so then they can get behind it. Now we have confusion throughout the country. Some people wear masks, some people don't wear masks. I mean, that's the worst thing that this president has done, frankly, is belittle wearing masks. He will say, oh, I did wonderful things. I shut down travel from China. That was good. Didn't shut it down completely. Thousands of people came in from China, and they also came in from China through Europe. So, but it was good he did that. But on the other hand, he says, wear a mask, and then he belittles people who wear masks. That's a terribly confusing message to send to people who are trying to figure out, how do I live my life? What do I do? What's happening with the economy? Will I have a job? Will my children be able to go to school? I'm scared. That's what people are feeling. They're feeling scared, frustrated. And what it takes is someone who's willing to stand up, say, this is what we know. We'll keep telling you as we know more, but not lying to them. The American people, the vice president kept saying, I trust the American people last night at the debate. Yeah, I do too, but you've got to give them the facts. They can't operate in a vacuum without knowing what really are the things that they need to do. Then they'll do them. Now I'm afraid we've lost a lot of that opportunity. The distrust has gotten so bad. And the president right now is sort of veering all over the place. You don't know what to believe, and I understand why people are confused, but that's why someone like Joe Biden, with his years of experience, his years of showing that he knows how to bring people together and he knows how to lead, are so crucial at this time in our history. We really need this kind of leadership, and he would step up to the plate and give it, even if the message he had to deliver wasn't going to be the most popular.
Yeah, hear, hear. Ambassador Cardenas, I'd like to go to you next to talk about Florida a little bit, as all eyes are on Florida, as they seem to be every 4 years. Over the last few weeks, there's been a lot of talk about how the Hispanic vote in Florida is going to play out. There are over 30 million eligible Hispanic voters in 2020. How important will those voters be in determining the outcome of the election? And feel free to weigh in a bit on just how crucial Florida is going to be, particularly on election night.
Well, let me say this. No Republican has ever won the presidency without winning Florida since 1928 with Calvin Coolidge. That gives you a perspective. I'll give you another perspective. The last 50 million votes cast in Florida for the presidency of the United States, only 20,000 votes separate both parties. Florida has historically been that way. I have spent so many sleepless nights on the night of the election waiting for results. And most of our elections are decided by a couple of points. And I don't believe it might be that much different again this year. The Latin America vote, the African American vote have been increasing in Florida as they have elsewhere in the country. Now, about 40% of our votes cast in Florida will be cast by minorities. We're getting younger and older in our voting patterns, and that's a significant vote. Senior citizens, when I started this process, would live 10 years less than they do now. And so now when we talk about senior citizen votes, these are people who, instead of voting 5 years, well, they're senior citizens until they pass on, they're voting 15, 20, and 30 years. And so it's a permanent vote that's ever increasing. And Florida seems to be one of the most predictable eventual homes for retirees. And then, our Latin America population is very different. We come from different places, used to be dominated by Cuban exiles. Now we're merely 1/3 of the overall Latin America vote. Cuban exiles, when I started in this process with Ronald Reagan, would vote 80% Republican. Now, Joe Biden has his, task cut out for him, but it's getting different. And Florida, unlike many other places, survives economically so much on foreign policy and what's going on around the world. And if I could take a second about that, I know that we spend all of our time talking about the character of the candidates, the pandemic, our economic recession, and obviously social justice. And it seems like those issues are controlling our conversation. But for someone who had to flee a communist country like me, foreign policy has always been at the forefront of how I feel. That's where I have always felt our biggest threats as a nation come from. After World War II, we had probably 75, 80% of world GDP. Now it's 20%. And if you look at our rearview mirror, you look at China, which is the first adversary. That's not just a military or political adversary, they're an economic adversary. And this president, the last 4 years, has made sure that we have turned our backs on our allies. He has relationships that are bewildering to most of us who follow foreign policy with authoritarian communist leaders around the world. And when you talk to leaders in Europe and elsewhere, and we have offices in 23 countries, so I know on a daily basis what reactions are. People are puzzled. They're puzzled about America. We used to have policy disputes with our allies. Now our allies are thinking differently. They're thinking, how reliable can we be? Can they take our word for things? And that's going to take longer to fix than the pandemic or the economic recession. Our foreign policy is in turmoil. Our nation's probably more at danger because of what's happened in the last 4 years than we are with our own domestic challenges. And I can't wait for there to be a change at the White House, because I don't think we can survive another 4 years of this kind of foreign policy and instability.
Mm-hmm. Representative Dent, I'd love for you to talk about some of the recent news, this week, when Donald Trump abandoned the coronavirus stimulus talks via tweet. What was your reaction to his refusal to even negotiate on stimulus talks? And then what do you think the impact will be to Americans across the country?
Well, my initial reaction to the president's walking away from these negotiations was, one, it was irrational, and two, it was reckless. Three, they were actually reasonably close to a deal. There was a problem solvers caucus in Congress, in which I was a part when I served, that actually put forward a pretty good plan. It had about $1.6 trillion with a slight escalator, and that was actually a good place to land. The White House even said nice things about it. And Pelosi's around 2.2 trillion. They're not that far apart at this point. And for the president to walk away, I think, set off alarm bells, not just among the Democrats, but the Republicans in Congress. I mean, I think they are just as bewildered and frankly enraged by this as anyone else. But, I actually had the opportunity to spend time with President Trump in his office when I was in Congress. I didn't support him in 2016. And I just like to share something with you. during the healthcare debate, many governors, including Governor Snyder, who's on the call on the Zoom with us today, were concerned about the changes to the healthcare law. Of course, the president never presented a plan back then, still hasn't presented one. And I went into the White House with a small group of members, and I gave the president of the United States a letter from 4 Republican governors, including Governor Snyder, Kasich, Sandoval, and Hutchison, trying to explain to him the problems with the Medicaid changes and what needed to happen, and the suggestions about how to make it better. And much to my surprise, the president didn't really seem to care. And he basically told me I was going to destroy the Republican Party because I didn't sign up for this bill that I felt was fatally flawed in so many ways. And he just kind of went off without any sense of interest in the policy that was to be discussed, the impacts on human beings, didn't care. I mean, that's what shocked me about the whole thing. I thought, maybe, okay, he's the president, he might actually care, but he didn't. And to follow up on, I think what Al just said too, what also stuns me about this president is I often say it's the isms. It's the isolationism. It's the naked protectionism. It's the nativism. It's the unilateralism, and at times nihilism that seems to be what this president advances. And as Al said too, I never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that a Republican president of the United States would be essentially advancing the malign foreign policy interests of a Russian autocrat, Vladimir Putin, in Europe and in the Middle East, to badmouth NATO, to try to unravel the European Union. I mean, the president wants to undo the international order that our parents and our grandparents fought so hard to establish in the aftermath of the Second World War. The fact that they were able to bring about a unified, peaceful Europe that is prosperous, I mean, it's the crowning foreign achievement of this country. And for the president to try to blow it all up and throw it all away without anything to replace it, to me, is utterly reckless, dangerous, and disqualifying. And I am just amazed that more of my Republican friends are not as alarmed by this, to embrace these autocrats and Kim Jong-un, he fell in love with them. It's a bromance, for heaven's sake. His admiration for Erdogan in Turkey, and of course, this relationship with Putin is to me just so startling and stunning. But at the end of the day, I think it's not just, and I don't address the question.
Yeah.
Why? To my Republican friends, they will tell me, yes, I think Trump's crazy. We think he's terrible, but but it's about the tax cuts and it's about the regulatory changes. And I try to say to them, there are principles larger than a momentary tax cut or a beneficial regulatory change. That this election is not about right left. It's about right or wrong, stable or unstable, security versus insecurity. That's what this is about. It's not ideological. We're long beyond that. I mean, the president is not a conservative. He's not center right. He is an illiberal populist and nativist. That's what he is. And and the reason why I'm here and why I'm supporting Joe Biden is simply because I think that Joe Biden will restore some sense of normalcy to the functioning of government. He's a decent and honorable man. And frankly, I hope he can tamp down the pressures he's going to face from the left wing of his party, which is, can be every bit as reckless and dangerous as Donald Trump is, frankly. And I hope he can do that. But I do think he will at least, he believes in the American tradition, and he'll try to bring back some semblance of normalcy to how we should function and at least make an attempt to try to unify us. I mean, that's not too much to ask of a president. And that's why I'm supporting Joe Biden, even though he's campaigned for my opponents and I've campaigned for his. It's nothing personal, but at least he's a decent and honorable man. And I think that's what we need in the White House at this moment in time.
Yeah. John Bellinger, Congressman Dent mentioned the isms. And that reminds me of something Secretary Condoleezza Rice said a couple of years ago when I had the opportunity to meet her. But she referred to them as the four horsemen of the apocalypse, right? Populism, nationalism, isolationism, protectionism, and they tend to ride together. You served on the National Security Council under President George W. Bush. Can you talk about how the Trump presidency has changed the way the United States is viewed abroad because of the embrace of these isms? And then, even more broadly, what you think this trend, which is not just happening here in the United States, it's happening around the world, means for our own national security.
I will, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight. It's hard to know which is more troubling, Donald Trump's domestic policies or his foreign policies. They're both equally bad, but I've spent my career in national security, foreign policy, after I moved on from the National Security Council, and I was in the Situation Room on 9/11. I moved on to be Condoleezza Rice's general counsel at the State Department in the second term, and I've devoted my life to this. I'm here actually in a dual-hatted capacity because I represent more than 130 former senior Republican administration national security officials who are so concerned about what Donald Trump has done to our country over the last 3.5 years, his utter abdication of leadership in the world, that we have been, for the last couple of months, taking out ads in major newspapers around the country, alerting the American people to the dangers of a continued Trump presidency and saying that he is unfit for office. These are people with more than 1,000 years of experience serving our country. 2 former CIA directors, the former director of national intelligence, John Warner, the former chairman of the Armed Services Committee, my former boss, William Webster, the former head of the FBI and the CIA, the deputy secretaries of state, Chuck Hagel, the former Secretary of Defense. These are people who are really gravely concerned about the future of the country under Donald Trump. And let me just take some of this apart, Ron, to answer your question.
Please.
Donald Trump has gravely damaged America's reputation in the world. I don't think any of us can think of a president in the last 80 years who has completely abdicated global leadership. Think of the great leaders we have had, both Democratic and Republican, from Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman to Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, George Bush. All of these, whether you agreed with every one of their policies or not, were leaders around the world. We were respected, even if our allies didn't agree with every policy. Donald Trump has now turned not only the presidency himself into a laughingstock, but America into, sadly, a laughingstock. We're not respected around the world anymore. We've become an object of pity under the coronavirus. So it's hard for me to, all of us try to understand the support that Donald Trump has, but I wish I could say to these people, from someone who spent my time at the State Department, how in 3.5 years, Donald Trump has lost the support of the rest of the world. To echo a couple of things that Al and Charlie Dent said, President Trump has been coaching up to dictators. Our presidents don't do that. Our presidents, both Republican and Democratic, have had shared American values in terms of pushing for democracy, human rights, a free press, the advancement of women around the world. That's why other countries, even if they sometimes think the United States is hypocritical, that's why other countries look up to the United States for our values. And Donald Trump has completely squandered that. He's also grossly mismanaged his national security team, as we all know. Even today, just hours ago, he took more pot shots at 2 of his most loyal cabinet members, Mike Pompeo and Bill Barr, for not trying to prosecute former administration officials from the Obama administration. So he's fired his directors of the FBI, his secretaries of defense, his secretaries of state, his attorney general, 3 national security advisors. This is a man who cannot be trusted for another 4 years. And again, to echo something Charlie said before I turn to the difference with Joe Biden, this is a godsend to our adversaries. As someone who has spent part of my career in the intelligence community, I can tell you the Russians, the Chinese, our adversaries spend a lot of money to try to divide the United States. But Donald Trump himself, perhaps his greatest threat to our national security is how he has divided Americans one from another. And that's why the Russians and the Chinese support all of that. So on behalf of the senior national security officials from Republican administrations, all of whom have said not only that we oppose the re-election of Donald Trump and believe that he is unfit for office, but we support Joe Biden. Many of us know him personally, have worked with him for years. Remember, he was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and its chairman for decades. He's taken a long interest in foreign policy, even before he became vice president of the United States. He's well known around the world. He's well respected. He's been in the Situation Room. All of us who signed this statement, and I urge people to go and look at it at Defending Democracy Together, where it's posted, are confident that Joe Biden, even if, as we say in our statement, we might disagree with him on certain policies, that he will restore American leadership around the world. He will restore respect for America around the world. He will manage the coronavirus. He will manage a good national security team. He will not cozy up to dictators. And he said on day one, he will return to the World Health Organization, and I suspect, important to Governor Whitman, return to the Paris climate change framework. So all of us believe that Joe Biden would be a much better president on issues of foreign policy and national security.
Thank you, John. Jennifer, I'd like to go to you next. Like the economy, we're often asked about how to talk to Republicans who may vote for Trump because they're pro-life. And we've talked about this several times on both the podcast and on our town halls. And so I'd love for you to spend a couple minutes explaining how you would talk to Republicans who see Trump as the best pro-life option, given everything that's happened recently.
Sure. And honestly, given everything that's happened in Donald Trump's entire, career, his entire path that has led him to this point, I'm a Republican. I'm still a Republican. I'm a conservative. I consider myself a pro-life Republican. Many friends still in the Republican Party. And this is one of those issues that honestly just kind of baffles me almost sometimes when I hear people say, but pro-life, but what about life? Donald Trump may be the most anti-life president we have had in my adult life, as far as I can remember. There's a lot of people who are single issue voters, who are pro-life voters, are very concerned about the judges. And somebody just said to me earlier today, and it just struck home, all the judges that have been appointed could easily have been appointed by any other Republican president. It was Mitch McConnell who, kind of created this judge, this influx of judges and led that process. It had nothing to do with Donald Trump. For Donald Trump, it was just a tool. It was just a way to manipulate voters. But is Donald Trump a pro-life voter? A pro-life president? Of course he's not. How can somebody who thinks that it is okay to take children away from their parents and put them in cages for any reason at all be considered pro-life? How is that pro-life? How can somebody who refuses to denounce organizations like the Proud Boys and white nationalism and engages regularly in racist dog whistles in order to, get his base activated and excited behind him, completely deny the dignity and equality of life? How can that person be considered pro-life? When you have a president who tells duly elected congresswomen of color to go back where they came from, who demeans women in the most misogynistic ways, who will mock the disabled, who will attack our veterans and our military and call them idiots and suckers. He is the antithesis of understanding anything at all about the dignity and the sanctity of life. There is no argument that you can make to me that will convince me that Donald Trump is in any way a pro-life person, much less a pro-life president.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask a follow-up question to you because unfortunately one of our guests this evening wasn't able to make it, and that's former chairman of the RNC, Michael Steele. He had a personal conflict come up, but we were going to discuss the diversity in the Republican Party with Chairman Steele.
Right.
So, I wonder what you would say about what embracing white nationalism. I can't believe I'm saying these words.
I know it makes you want to hang your head just to say it out loud, doesn't it?
To even have to ask the question what embracing white nationalism does for the diversity of a party that once upon a time recognized that the only way to move forward was to be more inclusive to minority communities, to the LGBTQ plus community, to people of color. What happened? For those of you who aren't familiar with this, I'm referring to what the RNC called the Growth and Opportunity Report, which was commissioned by the party leadership in 2012 after Mitt Romney lost the presidential election, and was released in 2013, often referred to as the autopsy report, which essentially was a mandate to include more people of color, include more minority communities, include the people who have been essentially left behind and written off by the Republican Party. And what has happened since then is that Donald Trump took it exactly in the opposite direction. He's shrunk the party. And sorry, this is a long-winded question, but I feel passionate about it.
I know it's something you're passionate about, Ron. I respect that.
And we hear a lot about how the president loves to tweet about having 96% support among Republicans, but what he doesn't tell you, and what Fox News doesn't tell you, is that he's shrunk the party by at least 10, 12 points over the last 13 months. And so the people who still identify as Republicans maybe support him at that degree, but he has shrunk the pie. And we all know that the first rule in politics is that it is a game of addition and not subtraction. How should we think about the future of the Republican Party, if there is one, and what he has done to this idea of diversifying the base?
Well, first, let me say, more important to me, frankly, and that's why I'm here, more important than what this does to the party is what this does to the country. To have a leader of the free world who refuses to denounce white nationalism, who uses our cultural differences to divide us and damage us rather than to bring us together and lift us up. It's extraordinarily damaging. The autopsy report that you talk about, I was at the RNC when they went through that whole process of, after the Mitt Romney loss. And it is extraordinary to me now to see and listen to people in party leadership who were there when I was there during that time. Whether they embrace what this president is saying or doing or not is one question, but the fact that they refuse to speak up against it is another one altogether. If you have a party that cannot speak to Latino voters, that cannot speak to people of color, that cannot speak to women, that cannot speak to millennials, that cannot speak to LGBTQ voters, if you have a party that cannot speak to the diversity that is our nation, then that party cannot survive. When I was chairman in New Hampshire, I used to, and it was, I was disappointed at how often I felt like I had to say it during that last year. The 2016 was the end of my term as chairman. And I would go out and talk to people all the time, our activists who were very worried that if they didn't embrace Donald Trump, that we would lose all these voters, that somehow, there was this, enormous mass of voters that we would lose and the party would be destroyed. And what I would say to them is, a party doesn't die when it loses the most radical amongst us. And a party doesn't die, unfortunately, when it loses the oldest voters amongst us. It dies when we lose the millennials, when we lose the youngest voters. It dies when we decide that as a party, there is going to be a lane that these folks are not for us. these folks are not for us. We just want these folks down this lane here in the middle. True republicanism that is founded in the words and the actions and the leadership of Abraham Lincoln is about equality and inclusion. And conservatism is about liberty and opportunity for all. That's what the Republican Party that I joined was all about. And if, to your question, there's a future for the Republican Party, it has to be rooted in those principles and those values.
Thank you, Jennifer. Governor Whitman, I want to come back to you because there's so many of our listeners and the people watching and their friends and their family who are current and former Republicans, and they have never voted for a Democrat before. This will be their first time. There are a lot of people who write in and they say that their friends or family don't want to vote for Donald Trump, but they feel like they need permission to vote for Joe Biden. I think that seeing a group of leaders like we have assembled here today should create that kind of permission for them. But what would you say to those voters for whom this is their first time ever voting for a Democrat?
I would say, don't worry, lightning is not going to strike you. But more importantly, this is truly about the future of our country. I don't think I've ever seen a president that had such little respect for the Constitution, for the rule of law, for the basic values that set this country aside. And I would hope all those that are concerned about pulling a lever or whatever we do nowadays, checking off a box for a Democrat because they haven't done it before, will look and will have listened to the people that they're hearing tonight and from whom they've heard. Look at our list of those who we couldn't have on the panel because it just would have been totally unwieldy, and understand these are thoughtful people who have been in the Republican Party for most of them a very long time, who are passionate about it and who feel and understand that this man, Donald Trump, is not a Republican. He really never has been. He's been a Democrat. He's a party of one. And when the Republicans didn't even try to adopt a platform at the last convention, they made it very clear that that party that they have doesn't stand for anything. It's whatever Donald Trump says a position is on an individual day. And as we've seen, that can change from 1 hour to the next via Twitter feed. So there's no stability there. There's no center there. There's no loyalty to a party there in this president. So it's not that you're abandoning him. He's abandoned the party. And he has taken, unfortunately, a lot of people with him. But for those who haven't voted Democrat before, just remember, this is not a Republican. And if you want to vote Republican down the line because you have good down ballot Republican candidates, by all means do so. But this is really important at the top of the ticket and the message we send and the future for a Republican Party, if you care about that. And I do happen to care. I grew up in it, and as my parents and grandparents as well. So it's a time. It's a time to stand up, a time to think about the greater good and our Constitution, our values, make America that shining city on a hill again, the way the rest of the world looked up to us. This is the time to do it.
That is such a good point, and really well made, that this isn't a Republican. Yeah, Jennifer, you've said that before about, I haven't moved. The party has moved. I've been standing here in the same place, and I think a lot of our viewers needed to hear that. Governor Snyder, I have a question for you about the way we've normalized Donald Trump, the way we've normalized the way he speaks and the way he acts. And earlier this week I recorded a podcast episode with Carly Fiorina, who is my former boss, and she mentioned that one of the most important aspects of leadership is that how you do something is just as important as what you do. And so I wonder if you could talk about the importance of civility in our leaders and the example that sets.
I appreciate that, Ron. That's been a theme I've had for the last several years. When I was still governor, the last 2 or 3 years, every talk I would give, I would include a piece on civility because of what was happening in our country. and I appreciate all the wonderful comments. It's great to have the foreign policy experts and things like that. I learn something new from these smart people every time I get to listen to them. To put it in context, though, I've told people that I view the greatest threat to our country is us. And it's this lack of civility. We're the greatest country in the world, but you cannot maintain that status if you can't get along with yourself. It just doesn't work. And so you've watched over the past few years, it just become worse and worse. And if you look at it, I view Donald Trump as an accelerant on this whole process. He's accelerated this process of incivility. And to me, it started from his inaugural speech. I was there. Being a governor, I had the pleasure and honor of sitting up on the, that whole section where you got to sit and watch all the dignitaries come in, and I'm sitting there with my fellow governors, and I listened carefully to his speech saying, okay, you have campaigns, and I've always been a positive person. I don't believe in negative campaign, but you get that. And so you hope when they take office, okay, now you can really find out how they're going to bring people together, and here's a chance to heal after a very heated election last time that was ugly. And he got up and gave an inaugural talk where he only spoke to his supporters. He didn't speak to our country. He didn't speak to all our citizens. And one thing I learned as governor is if you're a leader, part of your responsibility and honor of serving is to represent everyone. Everyone deserves representation, whether they voted for you or not. I was proud of Michigan. I had a lot of people that didn't vote for me, but I worked hard to do policies to make their lives better because it was good for all of us. And we've not seen it improve over the last 4 years. In fact, it's only gotten worse in terms of Donald Trump's perspective. And so for me, that was a fundamental issue, that this man doesn't respect what the job is and what the job should be. And that doesn't work. Joe Biden does respect that. And as a Republican, I know I will have policy disagreements with Joe Biden. I mean, I can see it even when he gets up and gives speeches. There are some things I differ on. But the part I can tell you is I believe he will listen. And you can have a respectful dialogue about what our differences are. And hopefully, a number of cases, we'll find some common ground where he can move more towards where I am or we are and find better solutions. That's what government's all about. I always joked as a governor when I had my legislature, people would go, didn't the legislature drive you nuts? And there were cases that it was challenging at times, but I always came back around to say, I hope they made the product better. Because again, it's not just about what I think is right. They represent people too, and we should be partnering together to serve the people. Yeah. So I appreciate their perspective, and that's that soup and sauce where you throw stuff in, you learn compromise is not a dirty word. It's a good thing. And you work out answers and you get a better outcome. Yeah. So he's not learned any of that. And Joe Biden knows that. And he knows how to do it the right way. So again, if I'm looking at this as an American first, and even if I'm looking at this as a Republican, this represents the principles of both better is supporting Joe Biden for president than what we currently have.
Yeah, well said. That is about all the time we have for questions, and I apologize to everyone who asked terrific questions and we didn't get to them tonight, but I did my best to bring you a representative sample of all the feedback that we've gotten, and it has been such a pleasure to be here with all of you tonight. Thank you for making the time. Before I pass it over to Governor Whitman for some closing remarks, Jennifer, do you want to tell folks how they can help and get involved?
Well, we hope that they'll visit us online at republicansforbiden.net. They can find us on social media at R's and I's for Biden, especially on Twitter. That's where we are most active, and on Facebook, obviously, as well. The most important thing that people can do, Ron, is just really look in their hearts and consider the incredibly important decision they're going to make about who they're going to vote for, and that they will really think about the future of our country and the kind of America that our children and our grandchildren are going to grow up in, and the ability that you have as one person, as one voter, to really influence that and to make a difference. The most influential people can do is just tell their tale, tell their own story, make their decision, and then share with others, why they're doing that. And we are available. You can contact us through social media, through the website. We want to make sure everybody's questions are answered. They have whatever kind of information that they need to make these decisions going forward. And before I pass it off, Ron, very quickly, I just want to personally thank everybody on the panel today and everybody on the Republicans and Independents for Biden Steering Committee, Governor Whitman and Governor Snyder and Treasurer Marin and Representative Dent and Ambassador Cardenas and Mr. Bellinger and everyone who's been a part of this. I know it's something we all feel very passionately about, and we're great. I'm grateful and honored to stand with this fine panel tonight. So thank you.
Absolutely. Same here. Thank you to everybody. Governor Whitman, would you help us land the plane tonight and offer some closing remarks?
Certainly, but I think everything's been said. I hope everyone who is on the call, first of all, let me back up and thank the panel, thank the people who are on the steering committee and everybody at the R's and I's for Biden who have worked so hard to make all of this come together. And thank all of you who are listening or watching at home or wherever you are for taking the time to do that, because this is an extraordinarily important election. You keep hearing it, the most important election. People say that practically every year, but this time it really is true. It means the future of direction of our country. What kind of a country are we going to be? But the most important thing is to vote. We've gotten ourselves in these kind of situations because we haven't taken that responsibility as seriously as we should. We have an enormous privilege in our democratic republic to be able to choose our leaders. And having been parts of overseas domestic observation missions, I've watched as other countries who people have not had that opportunity, get that opportunity and how they cherish it and stand in line for hours. We need to remember this is about us. This is about our future, our children's future, our grandchildren's future. It's about this wonderful country that our founding fathers gave us. And Benjamin Franklin said it when asked what kind of a country they'd given us, the founding fathers had given us. He said, a republic, if you can keep it. I don't want to be one of those that stood by and watched us not be able to keep it, watch us lose this great democracy that we have and republic. So thank you all for being part of this. It shows that you do care. Do take the message out if you feel that way, but whatever you do and however you vote, vote on election day or before.
Hear, hear. All right, everybody. Good night, and thank you for being with us. We'll see
All
you again.
right. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.